welcome to this episode of Focus On with myself, Balesa Mufokeng. We are at the Standard Bank Africa Unlocked Conference being hosted here in Cape Town in Turkey at the Novo Foundation. It has been 2 full days of plenary sessions, high-level discussions and dialogues where we talk about unlocking Africa's potential. Most of the conversations that we have been hearing, especially from Standard Bank, they're saying that the time is now for Africa to move beyond the traditional paradigms, to forge a future that is inclusive, that is innovative, and most importantly, globally competitive. We did have a chance to speak to some of the key stakeholders that were in attendance, and this is what they had to say. There is no doubt that SMEs continue to be the backbone of African economies. What are your sentiments or your views on the current state of African SMEs?
From my perspective, I think SMEs across the continent are actually thriving, despite a lot of negative sentiment about them. They really are the backbone, as you said, of many of the economies. They operate in the communities, they employ lots of people within those communities, and they really do drive the economic growth across the continent. And if you look at the larger corporates, larger businesses, they are not really growing and employing more people. In fact, they're probably scaling back in some instances. And SMEs are the ones where you're seeing employment growth, taking advantage of opportunities, and really growing the economies of Africa.
Now, this year's theme is businesses shaping Africa's tomorrow. How do you see family-owned SMEs playing a role or even evolving from informal survivalist businesses into strategic players into the broader Africa's growth trajectory story?
So from the perspective of family-owned businesses, as well as SMEs in general, what you find is that they are really agile. They're able to look for opportunities, take advantage of opportunities. And specifically when you're looking at family-owned businesses, it's the family that's involved. They're often doing it not just for the profit or for a particular reason. They're doing it to make sure that their kids and their grandchildren have a better tomorrow. And so they truly are entrusted in how do they actually grow the economy, how do they grow the business, and how do they do what's right. And so from that perspective, they really are shaping what we see. And across our portfolios, we see a huge amount of family-owned businesses that are operating within the continent.
And how well are those businesses operating, if you can just give us the numbers?
So those businesses are operating well. We think that around 60% of Africa's GDP is driven by SMEs and actually family-owned businesses. So although it's not commonly reported on, we always talk about the negative aspects and components of it. Actually, SMEs are thriving across the continent, as I said.
Yeah. And is it in specific sectors that you see some SMEs potentially growing, or is it across all sectors and corners of the economy?
So we see SMEs operating in all sectors.
Okay.
If you think about an SME, they're operating within the ecosystem or within a supply chain. And so we see that they are operating extensively, a lot within retail, manufacturing, a lot of them in the government spaces, obviously receiving government contracts. So it really is a very diverse set of sectors that we see.
Let's talk about generational wealth. What does real generational wealth look like for family-owned small enterprises within the African context?
So generally when SMEs start out, they start out as fairly small businesses and essentially just reinvesting everything into the business. It's very often one person or two people, and they're actually just growing. When you start to see these businesses growing and getting bigger and operating over a longer period of time, they're able to create excess wealth, excess capital, and that's really when you start to move into the territory of creating wealth. And what we see from a Standard Bank perspective is that often you have business owners that do invest back into the economies and the countries that they're operating in, but also given some of the volatility within a lot of these economies, they do want to invest this into other areas. So we have an offshore presence in Mauritius and Jersey and Isle of Man, and that is essentially for those businesses to invest some of that wealth outside of the countries to protect themselves from volatility. It's not to say that they're not reinvesting back into the markets and the economies that they're in, but they are taking some of that surplus and building family wealth and generational wealth.
And when we think about policy, what would a more strategic support framework look like for you in the context of SMEs operating within this region, of course?
So I think first and foremost, many countries across the world have got specific regulation for SMEs, or they actually exempt them from a substantial amount of legislation. If we look at the economies across the continent, generally the same rules that would apply to a large corporate apply to an SME. So it makes it quite difficult to operate. It's not necessarily that it's easy for those businesses to navigate those things. If you think about it in a large corporate, you've got hundreds of people running around, understanding tax, understanding the compliance, understanding the rules and regulations. So I think first and foremost, it would be important to review that legislation and say, what is important for SMEs and what would you be able to streamline for them?
Yeah.
Secondly, I think the other piece that was spoken about quite extensively this morning is around the fact that, as I said, SMEs operate in an ecosystem. So how do you connect SMEs seamlessly into infrastructure projects, into various sectors where they can be the beneficiaries of downstream contracts and business within those particular projects that are taking place? And how do you make sure that that money actually flows seamlessly? We look at things like payment terms. I think corporates and government entities are renowned for very long payment terms. So how could you, one, get the money to flow, get the contracts awarded to them, and two, make sure that once they do, the money flows quickly.
What would you say is your key takeaway or highlight from the discussions?
Perfect. The theme of the day has actually been optimism. It's about the opportunity to grow and support customers in this segment of the market. We see a really significant opportunity to help small, medium, large and family-owned businesses to grow both here in South Africa and across the continent.
What I like particularly was the concept of reframing and resetting the narrative on Africa. Do you think the discussions that were held today did anything to shift that perception?
Yeah, absolutely. We had some amazing panels. We had a panel talking about AI and the importance of AI in small business. We also had a panel talking about the criticality of energy. So the importance of baseload energy plus the importance of renewable and sustainable sources of energy. We had a panel talking about access to capital. We spoke very specifically about some products and the availability of products to small, medium and large businesses. And so these are all very important in giving people confidence about what can be achieved across the continent as a whole.
This morning you did mention that you were quite bullish on Africa's growth trajectory. What key data or economic indicators were informing this view?
Yeah, let's start with us as a bank. So we've been growing our business across Africa for the last 30 years. Today that business makes up almost 40% of our own earnings. Almost a third of our capital is allocated to businesses growing across the continent as a whole. But then when you look at specific channels for growth, for example, China, Africa, in the last year, we funded over 100 billion rand worth of trade between Africa and China, just as an example. That's been growing at over 20% a year over the last 5 years. This gives you a sense of the potential of this market and what we can do with it.
When we think about some of the sectors, agriculture, infrastructure development, entrepreneurship, where do you see the greatest opportunity for growth as it relates to Africa?
So infrastructure and energy is a huge opportunity. My colleagues in the CIB business have got a lot of focus on that at the moment. As we all know, there are quite big infrastructure gaps, and it's our job as an institution to try and bridge that gap. Then when you think of business and commercial banking, it's all about supporting the suppliers into the production of that, bridging the gap of the infrastructure. And that's what our job is in business and commercial banking, to help those medium-sized companies as they supply into that development of infrastructure. But at the same time, agriculture and family-owned businesses are very closely aligned. Almost all agriculture across the continent is done in one way or another by family-owned businesses.
Yeah.
Likewise, we see the new solar opportunities and new renewable energy opportunities are very often done by mid-sized companies. So these are all themes that are important for the growth of the continent and fall within this segment.
This year's theme, there was a strong focus on unlocking growth through private to public partnerships. So what kind of partnerships are needed now more than ever to move Africa forward? And are you as a bank willing and ready to open your coffers?
Yes, absolutely. So partnerships come in many different forms. And so as a bank, we focused right from some of the sort of the macro institutional partnerships. So if you think of things like the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, we're a strong sponsor of that. It's very important for us. Today, we've grown to the point that we fund more trade into Africa than to any other trade partner. It's also important to form academic partnerships to help frame legislation and how we take the things forward. So if you think of with groups like WISER, the Wits Institute for Social and Economic Research, we've funded the support of the development of trust infrastructures across Africa. But it's also important to realize that actually as business, we have a huge responsibility to do a lot of this stuff for ourselves. So it's important as business to be getting out there and finding those opportunities and growing towards those opportunities.
And Bill, what would you say is your message to the delegates and the key stakeholders that were attending the plenary sessions and the panel discussions today?
Yeah, so two things. One is it's about opportunity, and it's about unlocking that opportunity, but also it's about working together. So it's amazing how many conversations we have with different delegates where they say, well, I didn't realize this, because remember, we've got delegates from South Africa and the rest of the continent here. And they'll say they didn't realize that this was available in this market, or can you connect me to that person who is discussing that specific opportunity? I'd like to work with them on it.
And that's it from this episode of Focus On. But until next time, it's goodbye for now.